So we're going to go ahead and start on continuing the refresh of the electronics. We will come back to the MPU. We need to remove this battery and replace it with a remote battery that we'll put down on the bottom, so if it leaks, it's not going to do any damage to the boards. The other option is to replace this 5101 with an NV RAM. Not too expensive, about 15 bucks. We're going to, I've got some lighting issues down here. So some of my lights are not lighting. So we're going to go ahead through the lamp driver board and possibly figure out, if we've got some bad SCRs and so forth. We're also going to, I've got no solenoid issues, but we do have capacitors on this regulator board that are aged. And then the soundboard, we're going to go ahead and recap. We've got a lot of capacitors on here, some odd warping to the sounds that may or may not be normal, but they don't sound right to me. So we're going to go ahead and recap that board anyway, because these are some old capacitors. All of these, we're going to reflow the connectors on them, clean up the pins, so hopefully get some better connections and eliminate maybe some of the flickering when the solenoids go off on the general illumination lighting. And of course, we will refresh the displays as well as I'll go over on what's going on with those displays. So that being said, we will remove this. I'm going to go ahead and start with this soundboard. We're going to go ahead and recap it. So we got some parts we picked up here. I've got a capacitor kit for this particular board. I've got some SCRs for both boards. This is just a standoff mount. One of my mounts up here is broken, so I got a bunch of those to replace those. And a couple of large caps for the solenoid driver board and regulator board. So from there, we're going to go ahead and take these parts and put them in. If you're curious where I got these, I happen to get this stuff at Marco, but Marco Specialties, you can get these at Jamco, Mauser, etc. This just happened to be a nice kit, had all the parts I needed in it. And again, it was just convenience because I was ordering some other parts for them, so it was easier just to put all the shipping together there. Lots of places that you can get Pinball Resource, Pinball Life. You search for pinball parts on your favorite search engine and you will find a half dozen or more, depending on what country you're in. There are plenty of places selling these parts. So, and the electronics, capacitors and SCRs are not limited to electronic stores. By all means, order from Arrow, Jamco, Mauser, DigiKey. All of them will have these options. So, that being said, we're going to go ahead and pull this soundboard and get ready to recap it and clean it up. And then we'll start working our way around the board. Okay, we've got our board here now on the soldering bench. We're going to go ahead first and just do a quick visual inspection of the connections. So this is a single-sided board. Flip it over. I'm just going to take a magnifying glass here and just do a real quick visual, see if we can see any corrosion concerns. We're going to go ahead and reflow all of the connector regardless. No, I don't see any major concerns. The board looks relatively clean. We'll do a little bit of clean it with some alcohol later once we're done soldering on it and making it dirty again. So what we're going to be replacing is all of these electrolytic caps. Electrolytics tend to dry out over time. The bigger they are, the longer they tend to last. I think that's just simply because it's easier to seal a larger can than the small cans. These little ceramic caps, they're pretty much indestructible. I mean, unless you physically damage them, they're not likely to go bad. But the electrolytics will go bad over time. Just We've got our input connector, we've got our speaker connector, we've got our volume adjust, and our sustain adjust. Don't plan on messing with any of those. The volume was okay, the sustain sounded good. A little bit of surface corrosion here and there, but nothing that's a major concern. So we're just going to go ahead first. I'm going to make sure that we have all the caps that we need to do this, so we don't end up getting partway through and finding out that we're short something. So first we've got our large cap here. You'll notice that the newer caps tend to be physically smaller than the older ones. That's just improvements in technology, not necessarily a indication of quality or any some sort. Oh, this one actually happens to be bigger. I've got 4 of these small ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, various sizes, that mid-size one and my largest one. Do believe we have everything that we need here. So I am going to go ahead and pull out the schematic for this soundboard just to verify that our values are good. And then we'll go ahead and start pulling parts. So here's our sound module. Pull the schematic out. Just to make it a little bit easier to look up values, I'm going to pull out the operations manual that has our board layout and our parts numbers. So we're going to go ahead and double check. So we have our board oriented the way it is on here. And then we have 100 microfarad at 25 volts, which is C13. That's this one. C17, 100 microfarad at 100 volts. Do I have more than I need? No, I don't. This sound module does not show this part. This is actually a -50, I noticed. So it's hard to read, but it should be right here. It's a -50. This board layout is for a -32, so I may need to so let's replace the ones that we are sure of, and then we will double check on that C23, which doesn't happen to exist on this board because this is a -50 board, not a dash. All right, let's start with our biggest one. Oh, be sure to note there is a positive on the boards. Make sure that that matches what's on the actual capacitor. Sometimes the boards are silk screened wrong. So not specific to Bally's, but in general, it's always good. Double check, make sure that when you pull the capacitor that it actually matches the board markings and that you put in your new capacitor in the correct orientation. So with that, we're going to go ahead and probably jump to a speed cut and start swapping capacitors. And a short little stop here to point something out. Make sure that you double check the markings on your capacitor. Now this one has an arrow pointed this direction. Typically the arrows on a capacitor will point towards the negative. This one, however, is pointing towards the positive. You see the little plus and the arrow pointed this way. You'll also know that there's kind of a thinner collar towards this end. That also is an indicator typically of the positive side. Or a plus, obviously, mark that direction. So just make sure that you double check what you're looking at. Otherwise, you're liable to blow up a cap in the process. So we will get this one on. So this last capacitor over here happens to be a 1 microfarad at 25 volt DC, just like these two. Now, this is not a fault of Marco Specialties. This was my mistake. I ordered the kit for a 2518-32. I didn't look at my board, I just looked at the operations manual. This is a 2518-50, so I actually got the wrong kit. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause real quick, and I believe I might have a capacitor that can go ahead and take that capacitor's place. So I will pause momentarily, and then I'll come back and we will replace that capacitor. And at that point I will reflow our connectors, and this board will get cleaned up, a little bit of alcohol, and we'll put her back into service. Alright, it seems I do not have that size of electrolytic around. Even in a radial versus axial, I don't have one. So I'm going to have to go ahead and order that from Marco Specialties. Not a big deal. I've got some more stuff I wanted to order anyway, so I'll order one of those and replace that later. For now, we'll go ahead and first I'm going to get that capacitor to sit down a little bit more, and then we will reflow some connectors. Alright, so we're just going to use some isopropyl alcohol, kind of scrub this board down real quick. I just pick up toothbrushes at the local dollar store, you know, get a hard bristle toothbrush, buck a package of 4 or something like that. They don't need to be anything special. That way you don't get in trouble for using the wife's toothbrush. These are just cheap spray bottles from the dollar store. will give this a good rinse. These pins are nice and shiny and clean, so we're not even going to worry about cleaning those. Just give this a good rinse, another soak in isopropyl, and then let it dry overnight. And we will give it a test. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop on this. Okay, well, it's several days later. I have picked up and ordered the last capacitor for the soundboard. We've remounted it into the box with replacement screws, and we're going to turn it on and see where we go. Hopefully, all goes well. I'd say that sounds pretty good. I'm going to jump in here and do a quick volume adjustment though. So we're going to turn on our self-test. Still a little bit more volume, and we'll go ahead and close this up, play around just to see how she sounds. Well, based on that, we've got good sound. Everything came out well on that, and we will continue on with the next steps. In this section, I'll just continue on, and we'll get the displays fixed.